everyone, welcome to the Game Dev London podcast, a community of game developers and game enthusiasts talking about the one thing they enjoy the most, games. My name is Nichola Humphreys, you can refer to me as she, her, and I will be your host for today. And today we are joined by Randy. Randy, how about you introduce yourself to those who may not know you in the game dev space?
Hello, my name is Randy Vazquez. I'm a game designer, and I think I've been designing games for a little bit, just a few years. I play a lot of RPGs. I play basically a lot of everything. Play a lot of tabletop, board games, everything. Kind of the typical nerd. I'm very typical for a nerd, like all the anime, like all the games and all that stuff. But that's about it. I guess you have questions for me or something today.
Yeah, I've got plenty of questions to ask you, and we can go so deep into the world of game design, and we can really dissect what it is to be a game designer.
Nice. Let's get into it.
But but before we go into that topic, what I like to do is ask all our guests a little icebreaker question, just so then the audience can get to know you a little bit more. So my icebreaker question for you would be: if you had to be part of any video game universe, what would it be and why?
Ooh. So actually, I've been thinking about this one. I I think I would want to kind of live in a cozy world, like a cozy game, like Animal Crossing was, because
Mhm.
people are always giving each other gifts, people are always feeding each other, there's pie everywhere, there's cakes and stuff. Because like I feel like if you say any other world, like if you say one of your favorite worlds from your favorite game, right? There's like desolation, there's like destruction happening, people dying, or some crazy mess happening. So it's like I'm like I don't want to go to that. Like I already have this world. I want to go to a nice one that people will like give me stuff and they're trying to make the world better. So I was thinking about like Animal Crossings, not Sims, because Sims will just people just mess with you, and if I have to become a Sim, it'd be terrible. So yeah, that's that's kind of why I think I would go to a cozy game like Stardew Valley or Animal Crossing or something like that in that world.
Do you think there's a great worlds to choose from, and I kind of get it with The Sims because I feel like there's that weird sort of underlining NPC sort of vibe to The Sims, and it's like who is actually in control, and it's sort of like as that whole metaphysical question about it, and it's like I don't know, there's something uneasy about living in the world in Sims.
That's the thing. Like I was thinking about The Sims. I was talking to someone about it, and then we were talking about like, oh man, if you become a Sim, you're nothing more than an NPC, and then your NPC is basically like a little hand goes down and grabs you and just does stuff, and you're just like, what is happening? So like I'm like that just seems more frightening than anything else now. When we were thinking
Mm,
about it. So yeah, cozy game. I'm going cozy game, so I can live a good
nice.
life and just relax and chill.
No, that's definitely a good vibe, and I totally agree. Mine wouldn't be like slime rancher, just because it's all you have to do is just take care of slimes, put them in a farm, and just live your day, and
Mm-hmm.
that's all you need to do. Occasionally change the color theme of your house and your clothing, and then
Mm-hmm.
that's it.
That's another thing. One of the people were talking about, like, oh man, I would totally live like an Elden Ring because I love that game. And I'm like, are you thinking about the question though? Like, you were being teleported there. And like a bunch of us watch Isekai too, so it's like kind of that thing of like, now if I was Isekai and I had like OP, but still, like, I wouldn't want to go to some of these worlds, you know? Just, I don't know. I'll stay cozy. That's my answer. Final answer. Cozy.
Final answer locked in. Nice. So yeah, moving on to the topic of this episode, we're going to talk all things game design and what is game design.
Mm-hmm.
So according to the CG Spectrum online, a game designer is a creative driver responsible for bringing a game to life.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be curious, what would you define? How would you define game design?
So I basically hate all definitions of game design, of what a game designer
Okay.
is. And the reason why is because it's such a nebulous term, right? You have so many different
Mhm.
type of designers, you have so many different type of skill sets, and people have so many different focuses and stuff like that. And like I wrote something a long time ago that I was going to share actually with you here. And I wrote this as part of a presentation for a elementary school that I was presenting of, hey, this is a career of a video game designer, right? And so I kind of wrote like a game designer is a dreamer, a tinkerer, a thinker, an artist, an avid reader, a problem solver, a gamer, an entertainer, a writer, a historian, an architect, an explorer, a scientist, a teacher, and a student. And
Mhm.
to put it all in, we're the glue for the game project and we're a jack of all trades. And to me, I think this stands out because like it just kind of the term game designer, all the stuff that we do, the tasks that we do, and what we do, like it kind of just explodes into what needs to be done. Yes, that needs to be done. I need to learn this new thing to do something. Okay, I will do that. So there's so many just facets that we do within game design that there's no really one definition of what we are, you know? So that is the reason why I
Mm.
hate most definitions, because it's like we're a little bit of everything. Like, tell me like a project that you've worked on that you haven't done research, that you haven't done some writing, that you haven't done, looking into like some buildings or architecture or something like that. Like there's so much information out there that everything is kind of within our domain that we have to look at
Mm.
and get inspiration from. So, yeah, that's what game design is to me. It's all of
Mm.
that.
To be fair, yeah, it's such a wide range of definitions that could definitely cover game design. And like I always think of it of like having hands in like several different pies at the same time,
Hmm.
which is a funny image to also think about. Just like putting hands in pies and running around a festival, but exactly. But yeah, I totally agree. There's so many different definitions that you could define game design, but
Yeah. There's so many
yeah.
books and they all describe it so differently. Like it's such a nebulous term. Like I've been in this industry for about 20 years, and every time my parents ask me, well, like, what do you actually do? And I'm like, every job I'm at, it's a completely different answer. And they're like, they don't understand because, like, my role keeps changing based on the needs of the company, needs of the project, you know?
Mm,
So it's always really tough because, like, we generate ideas, we create documents, we create game data. Sometimes we're building levels and a lot of problem solving going in, fixing bugs, or sometimes we're fixing systems that like, well, we only have this much time to do this, so we can't really think about it too much. We just have to go, and then we'll like deal
mm,
with the consequences there, right? And then we have to also entertain the player at the same time, teach the player. We have to balance stuff, we have to tell stories sometimes. We have to create systems, balance those systems. We have to create data, like the content, and then we also have to keep up with the new technology that's always changing, like the new engines and stuff like that. Like even the change from like Unreal 5.0 to 5.2, there's some decent changes that if we don't keep up with that, then we're like, why isn't this working anymore? I don't like,
mm.
you know, we're constantly evolving and stuff like that. So I don't know. We always have to learn. Like that's what the designers, to me, every single developer has to keep learning to keep up with the industry.
No, yeah, and I feel like that definitely applies heavily to game design because not only are we learning about the stuff that we use and the tools that we're using, it's also learning what the other departments are doing as well. So you have to learn uh, the tools parallel to like your peers essentially as well.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean,
Mm,
it's interesting, like when I'm talking to engineers from other industries and they're like, they talk to design or something like that, and they're like, oh, we talk to design, design has this thing. There's no tech talk. But then I feel like in the game industry, the designers, we have to understand the tech that we're working with. We have to understand the underlying hierarchy of systems and like how those things interconnect so much keener because, like there's so many different influential things, and we're not just building something to be functional. We're building something functional, and then we're also making something to be fun and entertaining, hopefully.
mm.
Otherwise, you're doing it wrong, but it's fine.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And like at the end of the day, game designers are making things for the players, and if you're not making it for the players, then who are you really making it for?
That's the thing is, I feel like there's some developers out there that really get a chance to make the game for themselves, and if people like it, cool. If people don't, they don't really, they're like, whatever. I made this game and it was cool. That's why I really, really like a lot of the indie games because
Mm,
I don't feel like they don't design for a target audience where like bigger companies, the AAA, even double A and stuff, they're the ones that I think tend to like have a target audience in mind, and then they just build a game that they think this target audience would like. And I do like that you said like who are we making this game for? Because like I feel a lot
mm,
of things within development we just forget that. And I mean it's like we always need to have a target. We always need to have some type of like player profile in mind when we're designing our systems to content, stories, everything.
yeah, that makes total sense. And like you said, with like the indie games as well, like even if the game developer is the game audience, it's still like making something towards them as well. So it's always, even though there may not be a written target audience down there, may still be one,
Hmm.
just unofficially.
Hmm. Definitely.
Mm. But earlier you mentioned that you were almost describing game design to your parents. I'd be curious, and like, yeah, I'd be curious. What would you say are some of the like biggest misconceptions about game design that people might have, like on the outside perspective of the games industry?
Well, I mean, according to my parents, we do nothing but play games all day.
Oh.
Like we seriously just sit at the computer with the controller and we're just like, yeah, this is cool. And like that's all we do. And I'm like, that oh, okay. But then it's really funny cuz like I would always build these beast of a machines, right? And my dad was like, "Why do you need these beast of machines if you're just going to play games?" And I'm like, "Okay, well,
Mhm,
here, you know." And I was showing him. So let me take a step back, actually. So I started in the industry actually as an artist, a 3D artist.
mhm,
I was a tech artist for a while, and I was just working with indie teams here and there and stuff like that. But I had to do a lot of rendering, I had to do a lot of rigging, and did a lot of doing mail scripting in Maya and everything. So like that is the background I came from. So when I moved back home for a little bit, as I was looking for work and working on indie projects, because like times were hard working indie at that time, because this is like early millennia, like 2002, and like indie projects you jump on, sometimes you get paid, sometimes you don't, based on how the project goes. And I remember my dad was just watching me work one day, and it was just like long hours and stuff, and he was like, "So how does this, what is this?" And I was showing him how I was getting the character to move around, and then I had to render it, and the render took forever, and he was like, "Why is the render taking so long?" And I was like, "All right, let me show you." And then I put that render on a different machine, on one of the normal machines, and it took like 4 times longer, and I'm like, "This is why I need a beast of a machine." And then my dad started doing video editing some years later, and then he finally understood, like, "Oh my god, I need a beast machine for this," you know but let's go back to the original question, though, is, which I already forgot now. See?
mhm. Yeah, I mean the original question are like, what are some of the
Hmm.
misconceptions that people have about game design?
Yeah. So get back on track then. Sorry.
It's
I mean,
okay.
again, like my
Tangents are
parents.
always welcome.
Yeah, my parents always thought we just play video games and we don't do anything. They also have a lot of misconceptions about how, um, we're not normal, or like like we're a
Mhm.
little bit different than society because of our interest. But I think that's so much changing too, because our interests are aligned with so much more people now. Back in the day, it was a lot of delineation between, like, even people that listen to a certain type of music, you hung out with the people that listen to that type of music. Now that's getting more spread out. The same thing with games. Games are becoming so much more mainstream now. So I think those misconceptions, little by little, are kind of going through. So back in the day, I would tell people, "Oh, I'm a game developer," and they'd be like, "Oh, okay," and like they would kind of just like, hmm But nowadays, tell people you're a game dev, like, "Oh man, cool. What'd you work on?" Then you can actually have a conversation. So I think people are more willing to talk about games and development and stuff. So as it becomes more mainstream, and now with my parents, like, when I had worked on a few games, my dad, he was working at some small little mom and pop place with just like where he works on computers, right? So he builds computers and he does technician stuff. And some of the guys he works with, like I went to visit him at work one day, and I had a T-shirt on for God of War, you know, and they're like, "Oh, where'd you get that? Where'd you get that T-shirt?" I'm like, my work gave it to me," and they're like, "Work gave that to you?" Like, what do you mean work gave it to you? I'm like, "Oh, I'm a game developer," and they're like, "Oh my god!" Like they were so interested in talking to me, and I was just like, "I'm a rock star," don't but like, but it kind of, that didn't happen back in the day, and it's happening more now. So I think those misconceptions are definitely changing. Another misconception I think is my parents all see gamers as lazy because all they see is us playing a game. But then a few times that my dad had asked him, was like, "So all you're doing is playing the game. I don't see you working." And I'm like, "I am working. Watch." And then I'd explain to him the system, how it worked, why it worked that way, what I would do to change it, and kind of just start analyzing the game. I mean, I'm pretty sure you've done the same thing. When you start playing a game, you're just sitting there playing it, but then you're like, your brain is just in the background doing like, okay, that's what they did. I'm like, okay, why'd they make this decision? Why'd they make start tracking things down? And you start kind of building that mental map in your head, right? And so the misconception definitely is like, I'm not doing anything. I'm just sitting there just playing a game looking like a zombie. But it's actually there thinking and stuff, and actually like taking, I always have a notepad next to me writing notes, and kind of just being like, all right, what can I learn from this?
Mm,
And again, going back to learning and stuff like that, another misconception is like, we're not doing anything, right? We're not contributing anything. But then again, we're entertainers. Whenever the world goes into a recession, right? The one industry that rises up is entertainment. people stop traveling, they have extra money because they're not traveling. Boom, where's that money funnel to? That money funnels to games. We kind of saw that during the pandemic a little bit. We saw that too, a few other dips in here and there, where games get a huge boost because people are staying home. They're playing big games, whether it's playing board games, they're playing family games, they're playing online games and stuff like that. So that's why like a lot of MMOs and a lot of these online games, they have a space, but it's always a trend.
No, yeah, that I totally agree with that, and you could definitely see it in the pandemic. Like even myself, who has never really picked up an MMO before, I got really into WoW, and now I have like too many hours on it. So,
Describe too many hours.
well, I've gotten to the point where I'm just like, oh, I can just hop in for 5 minutes, almost treating it like making a coffee, just like, oh, I'll pop in here, and then it's like,
Hmm.
oh, new content, I'll totally do that, and it involves a pet, yes, please.
Why, thank you. I will take this new pet.
Yes. I'm like, oh, there's new content involving a pet. Oh, what a shame. But yeah, I totally agree with some of the misconceptions that people have about game design, because like when I talk to my family about what I do, it's usually the first question is, "Oh, so you code, right?" And I'm like, "Not
Mm-mm.
exactly." And yeah, just like trying to explain to them like what I actually do in a day-to-day life, it sort of broadens their horizons, and they don't think that's what they would have
Hmm.
expected the explanation to be.
Yeah, I normally would get always like, "Oh, you do the characters." I'm like, "No, but yes, but no." And they're like, "Wait, what?"
Mm,
So it's always those things. Even I think within the industry itself, like when you have talked to some people, like they still don't really fully understand what design does. And I think also another misconception, even within the industry, is like anyone that has an idea can be a designer, because it's not just about ideas, right? It's all about like getting those ideas implemented and making sure that that's the right idea for the game. And I
mm.
think that is kind of a talent that not everyone has, or not doesn't have an understanding of. Because everyone has ideas, and ideas are great, but ideas are worth nothing if you can't implement that idea and you can't make that idea a reality. And I think that's one
Mm.
thing that designers, that's what we do. We take the intangible and make tangible out of it. You know?
Yeah, and like I've used the analogy before of like game designers, so these people who have like 10 different puzzles and they're trying to get the different pieces from different puzzles to solve one cohesive image. But I feel like you could also describe it as like game designers, the people putting together recipes in a way.
Hmm.
So we're the ones being like, oh, actually, you need 500 grams of sugar rather than 450 if you want more of like a sweet tooth audience kind of thing. So
Who
it's like,
measures? You just throw stuff in and it just works.
no, can't do that with baking. It's a science.
That's why I don't bake.
That's why we design instead.
Exactly. I'm not gonna quit my day job for going to go bake. I'd be like, we go bankrupt in like a day.
I can make brownies, and that's it. I'm happy. Some chocolate chip brownies or some curly whirly brownies. Done.
Curly whirly brownies. I need to see pictures of
Mhm.
these. What even that is.
Oh, curly whirly is like a British chocolate bar. You put it in the freezer to like shatter it later, and
Hmm.
then mix it in the brownie mix. It's delicious.
Okay, I'll have to look this up, or
Mm.
maybe you send me the link later to what they are, because that sounds interesting to say the least.
Curly whirlies are a delicacy.
The finest of the delicacies.
Mwah. um, but going back to game design,
Yes. Got distracted.
you were. I mean, it's very easy talking about chocolate,
Hmm.
You mentioned before about like programming and like you were a tech artist earlier in your game design career. So,
Hmm.
from all your experience, what would you say is like the game designer toolbox? Like what? Yeah.
Whew. Um, I don't know. That's kind of tough because
Mm.
depending on the studio, right? So like when I going back to like when I mentioned God of War, like when I worked on God of War, I was an encounter designer there. I just focused on encounters, combat, and the pacing and the flowing of the combat, right? And I luckily was a tech artist that used Maya very well. The rest of my team, they knew how to like move around in Maya and do like basic stuff, but they didn't know how to do the nitty gritty. So like I was able to just jump in, and I was zooming around Maya, doing stuff, and adding little things that I knew wouldn't get exported out, so I wouldn't break anything because I've broken stuff and I'm like, ooh, that's not good. But anyways, besides that, um, but yeah, like so I was able to use my skills from Maya and work with that because like on God of War we didn't have an editor. We did everything in Maya. So like I had to
Uh-huh.
place locators. I had to place this little like things, these little pointers, and be like this is a character, and this is another character. Then I had to make like little beads for the path that they're gonna follow. Then I had to do all the stuff in Lua scripting. So then I had to export the Lua and the Maya stuff at the same time, so it went to the PS4 dev kit, and was like cool. This is how it works. But like if I didn't have that previous experience, then I would have had to learn Lua, and I would have had to learn Maya on top of that. But it was also really cool because because I knew Maya, I knew how to manipulate a lot of the cameras and stuff really quickly. So then I started making maps of all my levels, and then I would plan my levels out on paper first and kind of play around with stuff. So like again, going back to like a board game, whenever I'm working on a level or I'm working on a current thing, I like to print it out, to print the space out, and I don't want to come
Mhm.
up with the flow. I want to come up with like, okay, this is the spacing and stuff like that, and like very rudimentary tools of making rulers and stuff like that inside the engine as well as inside Maya or on top paper, right? Just using a ruler and being like, all right, this person's 1 inch from this, or like, 2 centimeters or so, and then this
Mhm.
person is this much far away. So then you start really spacing it out so you can get an overview. Because I feel like a lot of game design, like a lot of games we work on, right? We don't get a good overview. An overview is very important for us to do. So that is one of the things. Like to me, overview is a big part of the toolbox. In a very long way, overview is a big, huge toolbox thing for us, right? Um, and I am the type of person, I love collecting tools. I love collecting images. I love collecting things. So like another one of my tools that I really encourage people to do is if I'm working on a game, I try to grab all the music from the game. And if I want to focus and I'm working on something, I have all the music playing in a like Windows Media Player on the side, and boom, I'm listening to the music. I can get the vibe and stuff. When I'm working on a level, I'd listen to the music of that level and go from there. If you don't have that, I put my background sometimes set to just cycle, and I have a
Mhm.
concept art from the game I'm working on, and that is constantly just shifting. So sometimes I'll just, if I'm having problems thinking, I just Shift D or Windows D, like let everything down, and my screen will just change and cycle and stuff like that, and just looking at the concept art. Again, that's another tool that we can use to kind of put ourselves into that creative flow, because that's like really hard to sometimes get yourself into that creative output, right? And then time
Mm.
boxing is another tool. Like time boxing is a great tool for us, because if we know, especially a lot of people in the game industry, we're all procrastinators. So if we time box, we're going to wait till the last 15 minutes in that time box before we actually start doing something. So we have to be smart about tricking our brains into doing stuff, and this is another tool that we have to get good at.
Mm. Yeah, like I interviewed someone a while ago on the Game Day Love Them podcast, and they mentioned like this technique of constantly paying attention in like work atmosphere. So it's doing work for a certain amount of time. I can't remember what the exact time was, but after that set time, actually getting out for 5 minutes, just going
Hmm.
for a walk, and then coming back to your desk, almost like refreshing your mind to making sure that you're always in like the correct headspace when it comes to like developing games.
Yeah, no, it definitely
There
helps.
was a term for it, and I just completely forgot.
I mean, there's terms for everything nowadays, so who knows? There's a lot of stuff. Actually, the last tool I want to mention though is in the past few years I've been using a digital notebook.
Mhm.
Like they have Books, or they have Remarkable, the iPad. They have a few other ones, right, that people can just sit there and just take notes and stuff. And those are actually really good because when I don't have those and I'm using paper, like a little notebook and stuff like that, I will go through that whole notebook, and then all those notes are gone because I'll never go back and read it. But I've noticed that if I have it digitally and I have it organized and stuff, then I can quickly go to the folders and I can quickly go to where I have this one topic. So then, because like if you have a normal thing, right, you have a meeting on Monday, then you have a meeting on Friday and stuff. If you go to like a paper one, the notes are going to be like page 15, and then the next notes are going to be on like page 45 or something, right? And those aren't together. But like in a digital one, the notes you have set up are going to be right next to each other, because you can have different files and folders and stuff, so you can organize your notes way better. That has actually done a really good thing for me to kind of organize myself and structure, so that way I'm always prepared for notes. And like note taking, I see a lot of junior developers and a lot of developers nowadays just don't take enough notes. And I feel kind of like kind of date myself, but like a lot of the older developers I see, like we're always constantly taking notes. Maybe because we can't remember anything, and all you young people, remember everything. But like it is something that like I always push the people that I'm managing or the people that I'm mentoring is like, hey, take more notes. And because if you
Mm.
write it, you listen to it, you write it down, you put it in your own words, you're gonna retain it a little bit better. So note taking is another big tool to use.
Mm. No, yeah, I totally agree with that because I am notorious for carrying around these little red notebooks at work.
Hmm.
Like I have a physical one rather than a digital one, but I add the extra element of labeling the date for each of the notes so I can almost flick through it like a diary.
Hmm.
And I even like label the notebooks themselves to be like, oh, I took notes in this book from November of 2020 to January of 2021, for
Hmm.
example. So it's almost like yeah, like a historical library of like my notes taking during like our project or during just general design.
Hmm.
Um, and one mainly because I'm just very forgetful and I will probably forget. But there's something satisfying about like having everything written down and be like, okay, I can always come back to this information later, but I now know that the information is stored and that's exactly what I need.
Hmm. Yeah, no, it's a big thing. At least like knowing it's there so you can always review it. So like when I'm working on like my little side projects at home and stuff, and I'm always doing little drawings, I'm always writing stuff, and
Mm.
having these things in like just one place always helps out so much. It's kind of like, when you're like leaving for your keys. If your keys are always on the dresser, it's like, cool, everything is right in the world.
Yeah, I feel like I totally agree with that. And like I like also being quite visual when I take notes as well. So I could just normally write notes with a simple pen, but I also have like a highlighter. So if I listen to like a GDC talk or listen to like just a general game design talk,
Hmm.
I will write down as many notes as I can, but then highlight the key things afterwards, just so then I remember like the key information because it's so easy to take too many notes and then fill a page within like a few days.
Yeah, it really is. And then you forget, why did I even take this note? This is not important.
Exactly.
Why did I put pizza 5 times? I don't know.
I'm really hungry. It happens to the best of us. But yeah, so we sort of talked about like the different tools and stuff and the different misconceptions that people have about game design. But uh, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges as a game designer?
I think so. I think that this really ranges from person to person, right? I feel like there's some really good designers out there that are amazing at being able to kind of share their vision or share their thoughts on why an idea works, you know? And
Mhm.
so the biggest challenge sometimes is some of the people that are not good at sharing their ideas or not sharing their things, right? So like there's instances of people where they're more the quiet designer, right? The quiet designers I think have a big challenge in kind of pushing their idea, pushing the concept and showing that, hey, this works, you know? And that requires like other people to trust them. That requires other people to be able to listen to them. And sometimes for game designers specifically, I believe most of us are always in the mentality that our idea is the right one, or our kind of the way that we should go about doing things is the right thing. And I think that's a big struggle for a lot of designers and stuff. And I try to catch myself all the time on that still to this day because like there's like, well, no, why are we doing this? This seems wrong, you know? And we just need to learn how to like listen better or being able to evaluate. Granted, not many places we work at have time to actually evaluate stuff. It's always you should just go, 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 go. So it's tough for game design. Another struggle is the pace at which we need to create systems, content, and everything. We have deadlines, we have to meet those deadlines. And that is always a big struggle for game design because otherwise, we would love to have the time to sit there and think of the perfect solution and work out the perfect solution, but we'd rarely ever have the time to come up with the perfect solution. And usually, there's never ever a perfect solution. Like every solution has pros and cons. Now we just got to make the decision. Decision making, I think, is another big thing for game design, right? And that's also running on a gambit too, because we have this range of, so to me, I think a lot of juniors, they're either in one camp or the other, right? They're like make slow decision because they're not sure about what they're doing, so that's lack of confidence, or they're very much full of confidence and they just make quick snap decisions without actually thinking the consequences, right? And then you have like way senior people that fall into those same exact kind of things where like they have the ones that make the quick decisions, but they're making it based on prior experience, or they have the ones that are kind of paralyzed because they have a lot of experience and they're like, I here's all the pros and those cons. There's no good answer. There's no good solution, right? So like whether junior or senior, I believe like they still have the same problem. And then the middle, it's all the same range. So that's also one of the biggest struggles I think, or biggest challenges for game designers. And then sometimes just sharing our vision or sharing ideas with other departments because they don't speak the same language as game design. Game designers don't even speak the same language as game designers half the time, you know? Because like some people are more visual, some people are more tech, some people are more logical, some people are more emotional, and it really depends. So like even when we're doing designs, we have to start thinking about, what's our emotional target, what's our functional target, what's our fun target, and what's our tech target. So like all these things we have to start looking at, we have to start encompassing that into all the designs that we make and all the various decisions that we have to make, whether it's micro or macro decisions.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And like one of the most important things as well for being a game designer is your use of communication. And I feel like one, learning how to communicate the ideas that you have to everyone is like
Hmm.
something that game designers really need. But then communicating it to all the different individual developers that are within a team, because similar to like you said, everyone will have like different ways of like functioning. So some people might be more creative than others, some people might want more logic and more like statistics
Hmm.
sent their way. So it's all about like communicating the design to like everyone within a room,
Yeah.
as well as like having that confidence to actually communicate your design in the first place.
Yeah. I also think something that you mentioned earlier was like the analogy used of like 10 different puzzles and trying to fit all this stuff into a puzzle, right? Like, I think one of the biggest struggles sometimes for design is just the ability to focus on like just one thing, which we rarely ever get a chance to do because like everything's always on fire and everything always needs our attention, you know? So we're constantly just putting all those pieces and stuff like that and trying to make like something, like coalescing that together. So,
Mm.
but it's kind of the fun and the magic.
Yeah, it's like controlled chaos in a way. It's like, but we're
Yes.
the ones controlling the chaos, but like our hands are still on fire. But it's like this is fine. This
This
is
is
fun
fine. Yeah.
and fine.
The dumpster that's on fire going down the river, you know?
We just have a sign like up high that says, "This is fine. This is what's supposed to happen."
As designed.
Mhm. So yeah, you mentioned earlier about like there being different roles and stuff like that
Hmm.
within like a game development team, especially with like the use of the puzzle analogy of like
Hmm.
different departments being put together. So what would you say are the responsibilities of a game designer within that development team?
Oh man, I think again this goes back to just being different per studio, you know,
Mm,
because every single studio has it set up differently. There's some studios set up that are very product based, where the studio is set up to be very organized and structured to like, hey, this is the product we're making and it's hyper efficient to make this product, right? It's meant to basically do. And then other ones are like people focused, where that one is more put to where the people that are working with each other and stuff like that, not necessarily the product to make the product, but to make the team work together. And there's really no good answer and stuff. This was something that's like a PMP was looking at, and like just a bunch of project management stuff was like, all right, what are we doing here? So like, and this is looking at cases of like industry, tech, and all that, and trying to make everything kind of situated. So like the game designer, we have a very split role because we're the ones kind of doing the design. We're the ones that are supposed to be the glue of things, right? We're supposed to be doing all these things. But then we have departments like production, which their job is supposed to be project management. Their job is supposed to be timelines. Their job is supposed to be task tracking. But a lot of that stuff kind of overlaps with what game designers do because if we're pushing a system or we're pushing a design, right, we have to know what tasks are being done. We have to know who's doing what, when is it going to be done, and why is that. And that overlaps with production, right? The same thing with tech. If we know that tech is working on something, then we got to get in there, work with tech, and collaborate with them. So that way we could actually be like, okay, so this is how it works. This is why it works. Tech teaches us how the stuff, like, we design the system, we give it to tech. Tech is like, hey, we built this system. Here's how it works, and here's how you do this, and it's like a push pull. Granted, I'm generalizing it really high level, but it's that push pull with tech as well, and being like, yep, this is how it works, this is how it you work with this, and this is how you can create data for the game. Boom. Now you're collaborating with that. So you have production, you have tech you're collaborating with, then you have art, you have audio, you have all the different things, right? So we're being pulled in so many different directions that we have to know a little bit about of all that stuff so we can actually
Mm.
talk some of that, like come up with a terminology, right? Some definitions in which we could all talk the same language. So that's also kind of one of our roles, is building that terminology. Um, when I was working on WildStar like many years ago, um, we had basically a small team, and I started with AI, and I was doing like combat packages, I was doing stuff, and then I moved over from there to the path team. And the path team, we created all the missions for ourselves. We created all of the NPCs for ourselves. We created the AI packages, the spell packages, the player abilities. We created all of the visual effects. Like, well, we took all the visual effects from the visual effects team, but like we basically just grabbed everything we could to kind of put it together and being like, hey, this is what it is. When we did a redesign on everything, we also had to make sure that none of our paths crossed the other ones. It didn't overlap as much. So I was in charge of the soldier. So like I was doing the assassination missions, I was doing the rescue ones, I was doing the SWAT ones and stuff, where I got to like make huge things and dumb, like really, really dumb stuff. Like we had this one mission, I didn't even design it. Someone else had designed it, but I thought it was just awesome. So like these aliens were like going around and trying to abduct sheep for whatever reason, and you had to go and jump and knock the sheep out of the thing, but otherwise the sheep would just start raising up and they'd be just like looking at you and stuff like that while they're eating their thing, and you just have to like jump and like knock into them to knock them out. And once you knock them out, the aliens would get mad and then zoom off, and then another one would come up and try to pick another sheep. So like the whole event was you trying to knock sheep out of this ray beam that is bringing them up for whatever reason. We never explained the reason why, and it was really funny because like the community would just go crazy with explaining why, and like narrative at some point was like, well, we have to explain why. We have to give them like, no, we don't. No, we don't. So like sometimes the role is to basically say no. Sometimes the role is to be like, yes, let's go crazy with this. Yes, I don't need to redesign this. I just need to push it further. I need to get crazier
Mm.
with it. We had another one where like you had five mines, and you basically strap mines to these sheep, the rouse dowers and stuff like that in game. And if you like set them off, because it was like remote trigger, if you set them off, you could blow up more. And then we had a little ticker on the side, this is how many sheep you blew up you know and some people were like, they were mad that we didn't make this quest repeatable, because people wanted to do this one again so that way they can just blow up sheep again, and being like, so they can get higher numbers and stuff. And we just gave them that number, so people started posting screenshots of how many sheep they blew up in one go. And it's like, okay. So just, you got to like, we just give people like dumb stuff to do and they enjoy it. And like, I mean, have you played Tears of the Kingdom at all?
I played snippets, but I have watched my partner play many hours of Tears of the Kingdom.
It is insane. Like the role of the designer there, right, was they made Lego blocks and they gave it to the players, right? And
Mhm.
then watching what the players do, the emergent gameplay that's come out of it, like some of these players are geniuses. And the tools that we give them, you know, and like they just go insane on it. Like they had person with a mech that was like shooting stuff, and they had things like smashing people. They made like a springboard that like catapulted, people and stuff like that. And it's just like, they're, again, the role of the designer here is just giving the player tools, giving the player toys, and that's what we need to
Mm.
do, is like we need to be able to do all this stuff. So on the work side, we need to collaborate, we need to get stuff, we need to coordinate things, but then on the player side, we need to also make sure that we're giving them things to do, giving them activities, building that fun, you know?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I feel like when you give players that extra level of creative freedom that they can have within a game, it really like immerses their experience, because it's not just like, oh, I've been given a tool to go from point A to point B, and then that's it.
Hmm.
You allow them to sort of like play to their own style, and like whether they want to skip a whole Tears of the Kingdom puzzle and just make a bridge, then they can do that. Because I definitely didn't do that, because that would be crazy. Uh, but then if you want to give them a hook with a platform in it to slide down said space that you could put a bridge on, then you could also do that. It's, yeah, like you said, it's given the players the tools in which they can
Yeah.
approach puzzles in different ways.
Toys are always fun, especially when it comes to like us as designers, we need to always think about the player. And I feel like that's another big struggle is a lot of designers forget about the player and they just want to design for themselves. And it's going back to the old question, but even within roles though, like we have to be able to look at it and say, okay, we're an entertainer. That is our role. How do we entertain the player? How do we give the player structure? How do we give the player rules? How do we give the player any of this, right? So it goes into how we make the design decisions. It goes into how we make our designs in general, and then working with the different departments. So it's like again going back to like the saying, it's like we're glue. We need to be able to tie in
Mm.
all the stuff that art's doing, the tech is doing, and within the time frame that production has set.
Yeah, I have always seen this sort of like running joke go around in different cycles of just opening up the internet, and it's like production saying, "Oh, uh, how long do you need for the project?" And then this game designer saying, "How long can we have?"
Yes.
And it's sort of like the like Mexican standoff of being like, "Well, you choose."
Yeah,
But
that's the thing.
yes, it can be yeah, it's always room for like making decisions, but also allowing yourself that little breathing room to like actually make those decisions.
Yep. Yep.
Mm. And yeah, so earlier we were talking about like note taking and like communication, but what would you say are like some of the skills that you need to become a game designer, or like what are the core skills to be a game designer?
So I kind of break this up into two categories, right? So when I'm doing interviews, I don't necessarily look for hard skills. I look more for soft skills, right?
Mhm.
And some of those soft skills kind of lead into more attributes. So like of course I want people to be creative, but I'm also okay with the person's not being creative, but if they're logical. It depends on the role, right? I want a person to be super driven. I want a certain person to be like I want them to be persistent after something. I want them to be adaptable and flexible. I want them to kind of be like knowledgeable about a lot of different things and be able to articulate themselves. I think that is another big attribute and stuff, right? And that goes back to what you were saying is like communicative. I want a person that's going to be super research hungry. It's like, I don't know about that. Oh my God, I don't know about this. How do I find out about it? Like that curiosity. I think curiosity is a very underrated kind of skill or attribute of a person that we need to kind of look at because some of the smartest people I have ever met in my life, all of them have been very curious about little things and they have no problem saying they don't know, which to me is another skill of saying, hey, I don't know something, but I'm willing to learn or I'm willing to kind of um, I'm willing to take time to learn it, you know? So, and then collaboration, it's to be critical about things and be objective about things. Those are another skills and attributes that I would definitely want, you know, for the, it's what I want from people when I'm talking to them. With other designers that I'm working around, I don't want to know it all. I want people to actually sit there and being like, hey, let's learn this thing. Or, hey, I'm going to learn this and then I'm going to teach you. Cool. If I don't have to go take my time to learn it and you're going to teach me, that's awesome. Then I can learn from you. And again, start doing that stuff. So, like being able to learn and then being able to teach it to other people, you know? So I think those are kind of important for like skills and attributes of what designers can or what they should be doing.
Mm. Yeah, I totally agree with that, and it's just like absorbing that knowledge so then you can share it with others and then see if everyone else has the same understanding of said knowledge as well. So it's just making sure that you're all on like the same page while also questioning each other and like asking, but why did we choose that? And what makes you think that over the thing that I thought? But
Hmm.
in a like a nice critical way rather than like in an emotional like way.
Hmm.
Not to say that it's not a bad thing to be emotional about your stuff, because it's definitely like passion drives creativity, but
Definitely.
it's something to just sit down and be like, okay, how can we have a discussion about this without it being like heated, for example.
Hmm. My favorite kind of
Mm.
conversations.
Jan, that's a chaotic meeting if I ever was to be part of one. um,
No, but like when we're working on things, right? Like you and me have collaborated a little bit here and there, when we worked with each other. And it was more of like, all right, cool. What's going on? What do you need? And that's the
mm,
important thing is like, okay, what do you need? I need this from this system. You need this from this system. Cool. Do they meet? Can they work with each other? If they don't work with each other, then that's where like that's the objectiveness coming in of being like, okay, cool. Well, these two needs don't match. All right. What's the importance? What's the purpose of this system? What's the purpose of this? If it's this and it matches closer to like this angle or this axis, then the needs of this, we can throw those out then and go here and make a new system for this. So
mm,
like there's a lot of things we need to do with adaptability and flexibility and just being like, what is the need of the game and what is the want of the player. Like I think the guys that made Arc, they had a really cool matrix of when we're making new systems, when they're making new systems and stuff like that, they basically had a little matrix of like, is this good for the player? Is it easy to make? Is it without controversy? And like the controversy thing I thought was interesting because, like I said, like if two designers are like, well, I want this, okay, what are the needs of the system? Well, the needs of the system align closer to this. Well, then let's go this, take the ego out of that process and look
mm.
at more of the needs of the system, needs of the game, and the needs of the vision, right? So I think that's really important for like a lot of the different attributes and skills that a designer needs.
No, yeah, that makes sense, and like I couldn't agree with you more in the sense of just like, what do we need out of these systems, and like how can we tie these systems together, and do we even need X, Y, and Z system to begin with? Like, does it work with every other system that we're designing?
Yeah. This also ties into something that I mentioned like a while back in this conversation, which was getting an overview, right? So some of the tools that we need for game design is like getting an overview. And if we can get that overview, even from a system standpoint, and like what you had mentioned, where do the systems work together? And like that is a huge overtaking. So like, if we can get the systems to work with each other, boom, it makes life so much easier. And also we save a lot of time with things. Cause like a project I've worked on in the past, right? We had like a few different spawning systems, and we're like, but why? If we use one spawning system, then we are only maintaining one spawning system, you know?
Mm,
So like I had worked on Godfall and we had spawning from a spreadsheet that was really weird. Then we had like hand placed ones in Unreal, and then we had ones that were events that were spawned differently, but then that event would sometimes take the spawning of hand placed ones and sometimes would take the thing, and it was such a mess trying to figure out when you're trying to like debug someone else's scripts and stuff, you're trying to debug someone else's content, it would take 4 to 5 times longer to fix something. Where like if I looked at my stuff, I'd be like, oh yeah, I know what I did because I did it, so I can fix my stuff really quickly. And so like for the different expansion packs that I worked on and also for the main game for the patches I worked on, like it was slowly by the end of the second expansion pack because we had a solid one system to do, and it was so much easier to troubleshoot. It was so much easier to maintain the data because it was something that was maintained in one place. But it took like 6 months of a year or to a year of conversations, to even get it to that point. And then by that point, that project was shutting down. So like by the end of that project, we finally learned our lesson and was like, oh yeah, okay, yes, we're gonna have one spawning system, you know. So it's always a learning. It's always learning.
yeah, like every time that I talk to someone who wants to try and get into the industry or just get into game design, I'm just like, just be prepared to constantly be learning. Like, even if you're coming out of education, you will still continue to learn no matter where you are in the games development team.
Yeah, I remember like I talked to some students that were in like elementary, middle school, and it was really funny when talking to them. I was telling them how like math is important. They're like, math not important. No one uses math, and I'm like, actually, so I also used to think that, but now I think this, and like I was talking about like just the parabolic arc, right? Or sometimes like even trying to get different things. You're like, all right, since I worked with economy, I had to do like modeling in Excel to be like, all right, this is how much this cost. This is the ratio of money. This is the loot cost of things. This is what I expect players to get. So it's like a lot of theoretical math, and that like we're making up fake numbers and fake instances, and we're controlling the whole thing. But it's still a lot of math that I would have probably when I was in high school or middle school or something like that, like I would have been like, math is dumb. I don't need it. And then like years later, I'm like, oh, I wish I would have paid attention to math more.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, it's very interesting having people question what like secondary school or high school subjects actually apply to something like game design, because
Hmm.
it's always interesting when you actually lay it out and say like, oh, actually, you'd be surprised at how much geography is needed when it comes to like looking at a level, or when we're looking at history, we'll actually need to pay attention to the narrative to make sure
Hmm.
that that ties into what we're designing, for example. So
Yeah.
just it's really a big eye opener when you're talking to like younger students as well. So
Hmm.
like not in like higher education, like university, for
Oh
example,
yeah.
but at those who are like teens and like below, where they're just like, we're just playing games all day, and it's like, actually, it's not quite that, but it's still just as fun.
I always tell people also like with the younger students, I talk about psychology, which is important. They're like, "What? But why?" And I start going into like just human behavior, marketing, and like all the
Mm,
strategies in which we have to kind of use, right? The tricks of the trade that we use to like get people to keep playing and stuff. And then like even when you start talking about like intrinsic and extrinsic goals, like that's all psychology. These are all lessons that we've
mm,
learned from these various industries that like when you think people think about psychology, they don't think about gaming at all, but then we're profiling the players, we're profiling the target audience, we're doing stuff. This is all psychology in the works, and designers, we have to kind of think about all that stuff. Even public
mm.
speaking, like in school, like I was telling the students, like public speaking is such an important skill because you need to be able to convey your ideas, you need to be able to present your ideas, and if you can present your ideas, you're more than likely going to have people listen to you. That's just like, that's just that simple thing, right? So it's
Mm.
just all the stuff in school, like they can help you at least get a base.
Yeah, and like, yeah, it's always interesting as well. Just like even when I was in school, the prospect of becoming a game designer was so like arbitrary. It wasn't a thing when we were in secondary school, because there was the option to take media studies, but then it was like, I don't think this could become like a thing. And then, well, obviously I was proven wrong. But yeah, it's I feel like it's becoming more and more open to
Yeah.
students nowadays, but
Hmm.
I feel um like a few years back, there might have been a case that like you can't get paid to be creative. That's just crazy.
Yeah, I think also like I didn't even know it was a job until like early millennia. Just it didn't even the concept of it didn't even pop in my head. Like I remember when I was young, like I wanted to be like a Lego designer. Like that would have been like
That's
my
pretty cool.
dream job, because I was always doing Legos and stuff like that. And that's actually how I kind of like started doing design was Legos.
Mm.
And my brother wouldn't play BattleTech with us because it was too complicated. So I basically rewrote all the rules and made my own version of it, simplified everything, and then we built all the Legos and stuff. And then we had like the whole living room would just be like Legos everywhere and like mechas and planes and like tanks and all that stuff, right? And little units and stuff all over the place. And like we would do full out battles. Like it'd be like Warhammer battles, but all Legos, and stuff like that. And then we were like, and when your thing got destroyed, the person that destroyed it got to take your Lego that you created and just destroy it and then put the pieces into a bucket. And then before we had the next war, you had to create units and pieces and stuff like that. So like every time we had a war, the whole entire battlefield would look completely different because we would tear down like mechas and stuff like that, make new ones with different weapons and stuff like that. And so we had like dice rolls, we had all that stuff, and it was just like a constant thing. And like I was designing that stuff when I was like 7. I still think I still have like the graph paper that has like all the rules and stuff written on it, with my grubby little hands. And it's like just doing this like all this stuff back in the day. I would have never even thought it was a thing. Like I had Legos were a thing, so I was like, oh man, I could do Legos. But games were still
Mm.
this like magical thing of like, I don't know, these games just pop up out of nowhere.
I feel like Lego is always used as an analogy when it comes to describing just being a creative and putting things together and like filling in the blanks of an imagination.
Hmm.
Like, what you get given like a small grid on as like a Lego piece, and then like some wheels, and then like maybe you also get given like different colored blocks and
Hmm.
different other mechanical structures. It's like, what can I make out of this? And then how can I make this fun? And it's like using that to do like a Frankenstein moment of bringing alive your imagination and like the fun of like a game that you were coming
Yeah.
up with essentially.
Yeah. I mean, but the thing is, like, Legos was the only toys that I had. And to me, like, Legos was just kind of just a big part of the childhood. Like, books, of course, reading and stuff like that was always in that fantasy world, the mecha world and stuff, and then like Legos and like, of course, video games. But it was still always like I moved around so much in my life that Legos was the only toy I was allowed to bring with me because I could just tear it down, put it into a big bucket, and then go. Where
Mm-hmm.
like other things took up too much space, so we were only allotted so many boxes to move with. So every time we moved, we're like, nope, we can't take this. So it'd be chucked, and we just had our boxes, our allotment of boxes we could take. So it just moving around internationally, moving around within the U.S. Like the U.S. is massive, so moving around
Mm.
from here to there, I was always moving every like 6 months to 6 months to 2 years. I was always moving. So.
I mean, yeah, I can imagine that being like kind of a chaotic experience, but still having that internal sort of creative liberty of like I still have these Legos and I can still like make
Hmm.
my imagination come to life. Must have been a lot of fun. And
Oh yeah.
you mentioned like we've sort of discussed what it is to be a game designer, and we're sort
Hmm.
of going into like more of like becoming the game designer now. So I'd be curious, what was it like moving internationally to become like part of a game dev team?
So I started in game dev in 2002. Like
Mhm.
when I graduated from Full Sail and I started doing indie stuff, right? Those I stayed locally in the US, but when I say locally in the US, right, there's like 3,000 miles between where I was moving. So like about the same size as moving from one side of Europe to the other side. So like I was always constantly moving between California, Virginia, New York, Boston, Washington State, Florida, and Texas. Like those places and stuff. But then I've also lived in Panama, Central America, and then I was working on Skull and Bones actually in Singapore for a few years as well. Joining a new team that is a different culture that is it was interesting to say the least. And the reason why I'm saying it's interesting is because I actually clicked almost instantly with a lot of the Singaporeans, and I think that because of the military background, like me growing up on base and me being around military all the time, and everyone there, all the guys at least, all have to do national service. So all of them went through boot camp, all of them went through training and stuff like that. And so like I worked also before I did games, I also worked with the military a little bit as well, doing contract work for IT. So I had to do some training. I had to do some things with the military, and I was always around the military, and I always lived around military bases. So when I moved to Singapore and I started talking to the Singaporean guys and stuff, it was just very much easy to get along because a lot of them were trained by like European NATO units and trained by the US. So it instantly just clicked where I could just talk to them like military, and they were like, "Yep, no problem." It was like really easy, you know. Then years later, I moved to Sweden, and it is way different because no one really has that militant background. No one really has that hustle culture. Where like Singapore and the US have that hustle culture. And like you can work a lot and like workaholics are welcome. Where like in Sweden, workaholics are like frowned upon a little bit. So it's a different change because they're like, whoa, whoa, I need my work-life balance. I work my 8 hours and that's it.
Mhm.
And where I'm used to, like, even today I'm still doing like 9 to 10 hours a day because I'm like I choose to do this because I'm just like, all right, I'm less efficient because I'm doing this, but at the same time I'm taking the time to build relationship, taking the time to do what I feel is important. So Sweden is such like a foreign concept for me when it comes to joining a new team, or joining a new international team at least. Um, and it's kind of like it's slowing me down a little bit, which is not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's a good thing because now I'm just like, oh, okay, I have more time for myself now, you know? In Singapore, it's like we worked a lot, but at the same time, it's like they also work hard, they play hard and stuff. So like after work, we'd all go for drinks or food and stuff. It was always around food, you know, and I was always busy, constantly busy. We're here in Sweden, like I have constantly a lot of alone time, which I'm still like very just like adjusting to, and I've been here for more than a year, and I'm still adjusting to like a lot of alone time. I'm used to like also being Latino descent too. Like when I'm in the U.S. around home or wherever my family's at, then it's like 20, 30 people are like right there on top of me, like our parties are like the small parties are 50 people, and like our normal like family events are around 300 people, you know, and a lot of people are like, oh, that's so many people, but it's like, again, going back to internationally, like my family, we're from Puerto Rico, so it's like the US is not, US mainland is our home, but it's still different because in different parts of the US is different cultures too. And the West Coast is more chill than the East Coast. The East Coast is that, again, that hustle culture. So even me moving from just Virginia to New York to LA and stuff like that, then it was like way different vibe, different culture and stuff. Singapore, I didn't have that. It was hustle. Sweden, it's like not hustle, so it's like I had to like tone myself down with it.
Mhm.
So you kind of have to adjust, and like these are skills that I've been learning throughout my whole life being a military brat and moving around from base to base all the time, that like, okay, what's the vibe here? Okay, cool, I need to match this vibe. Okay, what's the vibe here? I need to match this vibe. So it's a constant like being a chameleon, constantly shifting to match the vibe as needed. And then like the last part of the rant, I swear, will be like will be to where like, military brats are usually pretty good at being this chameleon, being this thing, right? And that's why we can get along really quickly with people because, like, hey, we get in, we make the objective is to like, all right, find where the locals are, find what the locals do, and then emulate that. So it is a lot of that. So adaptability is a huge skill, huge thing. Like it's something that we need to do, and internationally, especially, people are from different cultures, so something I take for granted might offend and stuff like that. Like some of the Britishisms we were talking about earlier, like some of the Britishisms was like, what? That makes no sense. But like, okay, I'm just gonna run with it. What does that mean? And just
Mhm.
asking questions and not being afraid to ask questions. So like it's really funny when the Swedes try to teach me like Swedish terms and I say it and I completely butcher it and they're all like dying laughing at me and I'm like, okay, humility, you gotta just roll with the punches. Like if people can laugh at me and can do like that, then usually I get along with them better, right? And that relationship building means that I can actually just go up and talk to them like, "Hey, I need help with this. I need help with this." And they'll be more forgiving as well in when you work with them. So,
Mm.
when I was in Singapore, I was learning Singlish. I was learning a little bit of well, Singlish is like English, Hokkien, Tamil, Mandarin, and Malayu. So I had to learn like
Mhm.
five different languages, five different different phrases for five different languages, and then put that together into sentences. You know, and so everywhere you go, like learning a new language and just getting into the culture and just figuring things out, like that's step number one. And then the work stuff is similar, but even still, it's still different in how you work and why you work with certain people of different cultures. So long about
Yeah.
way.
No, it does kind of like tie into the stuff that we were mentioning before, how it was like sort of learning how to communicate with different teams, because it's not like you're going to interact with five different clones for yourself. You will interact with people from all walks of the earth.
The world would end if I had a clone. It'd be bad.
I don't know what I would do if I had a clone. I would just explode. um, but yeah, it's like just uh, understanding the people around you and then like learning how to communicate to those and within like the right ways and while still like communicating the information that you may need as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, you sort of mentioned how like you've been to all these sort of different countries and like different states as well, so you've probably been exposed to like all sort of different mediums and like different like games. So what inspired you to become a game designer, seeing as you were exposed to so many different avenues of different like career choices?
Mostly just piss my parents off. The one way I can piss my parents off. No. like I mentioned before, Legos, right? BattleTech, Robotech, playing tabletop games, playing board games and stuff. Dungeons and Dragons, like all the stuff, like reading the fantasy books and stuff growing up with R.A. Salvatore, Michael A. Stackpole, like all those books as well. Um, but like that's what kind of got me into my journey of like being creative and going from there, right? And just playing games in general. And then when I found out it was an actual job, I was like, what? People actually do this for a job and they get paid for it? Awesome. But then, like, my parents were very against it. So because they were against it, and me being anti-authority, I was like, well, I'm going to do it more. So then I kind of just kept going the route, and I stayed the course, and here I am, 20 years later, still making games and still having fun. So that's kind of
Mm.
good. Like my parents for the first few years were like, oh, well, when are you going to get a real job, or when are you going to do this? And I'm like, but I have a real job. But then like now they're like, okay, they just leave it alone. But the journey itself, though, right? It really started with just having fun, like doing campaign, like creating campaigns for people and having them play it, having them give me feedback, making little games here and there and having people play them. Like I'm working on a little PvP maze puzzler type of thing right now,
Mhm.
and having people just whenever they come over to have them just play test it. And when they play test it, it's kind of like I like that kind of feeling of like entertaining people. And I've talked about the entertainment as like, as a designer, we're supposed to be entertainers, and I like that entertainment part. I like that kind of getting people to do activities and stuff and having fun with that. So when I was younger, I was always creating campaigns. I was always writing stories. I was always doing stuff. And I actually worked as a reporter for the newspaper, local newspaper in Virginia Beach. For a little bit. So I was working there doing a correspondent. They didn't really have any Latinos. So I was the only Latino on the group. So
Mhm.
anytime the Hispanic population, Latino population had an event, they would send me, and I'm like, cool. So I got to go to all these parties, and I got to go to all these events and stuff like that. And I was writing about it, giving reviews, and just doing that. And in high school, I also did a lot of journalism, and I also did architecture. I was really into architecture and stuff. My mom forced me to do theater, which I hated, but like now that I've done theater, I'm like, okay, like this was interesting. Public speaking, I did a lot of extraneous experiment. I can't say the word, but basically, I was part of like a vocational school, and they had a group that we would do 5-minute talks, right? And they would give you 15 minutes to prepare, and then you had to do a 5-minute speech based on the 15 minutes preparation you had, and then you had to go out there and just talk. So like this is talking in front of like 100, 200 people, you know,
Okay.
and so like extemporaneous speaking. There we go, I got it. But like so I would do that. And all of this stuff is kind of just building into me being able to talk about things, being able to look at stuff, communicate with people, right? These are all skills that have built up to my journey of becoming a game designer, as well as my experience playing games and stuff, making mods. Like everyone made Warcraft, the RTS Warcraft mods, everyone made like the StarCraft mods and stuff like that, like old Unreal back in the day before it was Unreal Engine, then
Mhm.
Hammer Engine with like um with oh my god, I'm going blank on the name, Half-Life, the Hammer engine, and like all that stuff. So like I've always been dabbling with it, and then just fell into my lap because like I was working indie from 2002 till about 2005. I was doing indie projects, barely making rent half the time, doing small little things here and there, whether it was rigging or level design or whatever needed to be done, right? I could do. I was even production for a year or so where I was organizing and structuring the team, making spreadsheets of tasks and all that. And then I was working part time at some places. I got injured at the job, and I was like, you know what? I'm done with this. And then I just quit my job. I moved to LA with nothing but a backpack and a laptop case. That was it. That's all I had on my back, and I was just couch surfing for a little bit, just applying to any job that would take me. And Vivendi actually picked me up as a tester. So then I became a tester and quickly became like a specialized tester. So I did the min-spec computers. I did the networking. So like since I had IT background, I would basically be checking the packets, sniffing the packets to basically see what I can glean from it and see where the degradation would happen. And then I'd work with the different tech teams and stuff. Then I would work with the TRG, which is the technical requirements groups. of Vivendi as well. So like when the PS3 was out, when the Wii was coming out, no one there knew Unix. I knew Unix because of my background in IT and other stuff, you know. So basically, I could jump in, I could flash the drives and stuff. And little tip about the PS3 was there was a 25% chance you were going to kill that board. So when you flashed it, when you first flashed it and stuff like that, there was a 25% chance that thing would just turn into a brick, and you had to send it back. Yeah, it was yeah, I killed more than a few PS3s. And I'm like, oh, this is so expensive, but okay, Sony says to do this, cool. Following the instructions from Sony, and then boom. So like after that, they were going to be ramping down, so I made the cut. But I ended up like EA hit me up and was like, "Hey, we're working on this thing. We want to bring you in as a QA analyst for this." And then they brought me in as a special QA person. But then within a month or so, they fired me as a QA person and maybe become a designer. And I actually didn't want to become a designer at first. I was like, I don't know, you know. But then I started learning how to do scripting and stuff like that, and start making events inside Warhammer Online. And I just had a blast just building the events and building the encounters and setting up the whole area and stuff, working with the artists, working with the level designers and all that stuff, and just had a blast. And then I just kept jumping from like place to place. Every time I got laid off, been laid off so many times, and just having fun designing. And like every place is like a playpen, because it's like just different toys I get to play with. You know, I get to build something new, and I love that creation process. It goes back to being Legos. It goes back to creating the campaigns. It goes back to just wanting to entertain people. So that's always super important for me. That's kind of my journey. Like it is just me just constantly just going to the next thing, and just like a nomadic hobo.
Well, it's very interesting that you like describe it that way because as a fan of like Always Sunny in Philadelphia and listening to their podcast, they mentioned like a similar upbringing of like originally like couch surfing from place to place
Hmm.
while writing the scripts for Always Sunny, and now it's like one of the biggest comedy sitcoms out there, and like it's definitely like high up on my list for the things that I watch regularly on TV.
Hmm.
So it's a case of like it might start rough, but then it will definitely like soar into like the spectacular like position that you'll get into.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm still waiting for me to become a like I definitely want to create my own studio. That's like
Mm.
kind of be where my journey is hopefully taking me. But again, we'll see. I'm not really planning it too like strictly, because like I feel like some people are like very strict of like I want this, and like they have their target things. And I'm just like I'm just want to have fun. I just want to create
Mm.
stuff and work with cool people and stuff like that, such as yourself.
I try my best to be cool. um yeah, I mean like that's like a super international like way of or journey into getting into game design, whereas like it's always, I don't know, I always find it interesting hearing about the stories of how people get into game design,
Hmm.
whether they travel all the way across the world and then something just clicks and they're like, yes, I'm now a designer. Or like myself, for example, I started design courses since college. So when I was like 16, 17,
Hmm.
and then I just like directed myself into it from there. So it's always interesting hearing about like where people came from and like how they got into the position that you did
Yeah.
today.
Like I've taken very few design courses ever. It's mostly been art, you know,
Mm.
and like those courses. So like I don't know, like it's just I think some people it just comes naturally for to design things or want to create things, and other people do not have that thing. So like it's just natural inclination. So it's kind of cool.
Mm.
Like when you get a bunch of like game designers all together and stuff like that, and like start realizing how nerdy they are, you know, and like all the common interests, and like you start feeling like I thought I was unique, and then you know you're like, oh, I'm not that unique, because everyone has like similar interests. But then those similar interests even like branch off into like weird things, which I think is just awesome. That's what makes the industry great.
Mm. Yeah, I've never encountered two people in the industry who have the exact same interests and the exact same things, and I feel like that is sort of like the perks of being a game designer is that you're always going to meet someone different, and you're always going to work with different people. But it's that sort of fun of putting everyone together in a team and seeing how these different people go together, and it's quite fun actually.
Mhm. Yeah, the mesh of personalities are always just a lot of randomness and a lot of controlled chaos, as you've mentioned before.
But before you said that you've worked in a few different teams and stuff like that in the
Mhm.
past, and could you sort of elaborate more on like the previous projects you've worked on and like what were your roles in each of the dev cycles?
Oh, let me see. I gotta like remember. I'm old now, you know. So I mean, I've worked on as a designer. I've worked on a few projects that never saw the light of day. I've worked on Warhammer, Age of Reckoning. You know, I've worked on this one adult game that I will not mention the name of. I've worked on WildStar, Star Citizen. I've worked on God of War. I've worked on Skull and Bones. I've worked on Godfall, and then I'm working on an unannounced project right now for Sharkmob. But like I've also worked on a few other studios where like our game got canceled or other studio got shut down before we even saw the light of day. So like I was working on like a really cool game that I thought would have been awesome, that I still to this day think would be awesome. Was like I was working on a 1920s, 1930s prohibition game,
Ooh.
and we were actually doing some really cool stuff with like how we were going to have the cops versus the robbers, right? Or like the bootleggers versus the cops and stuff like that. But then if you played a cop, you could actually be a dirty cop. So like even
Mhm.
within, these different things, there's two different things. So we can always have an overlap. So it's always going to be that three type of triangle of like, there's a line, but there's people that are kind of footing the both line, right? And it's going to be an online game to where people can like PvP-ish and PvE-ish as well. It's like before PvE became a term, it was like we were already doing that back in like 2003-ish or so, and we had done um, like we flew out to California, for the company and stuff, and we actually did pitching to like Atari, Activision, MGM Interactive, and EA, right? And then we basically got like really good feedback from EA. So we're like, all right, cool. We're gonna be getting picked up from EA and all this other stuff, And it was like almost celebrations and stuff. But then like the studio closes down, whatever happens, and it turns out that like EA was working on The Godfather at that time, but we didn't know it. So basically, like we were seen as like, oh, this can't come out. This is competition and stuff like that. So like little stuff like that was happening, but it was an amazing experience to be able to like drive, like fly over to California, and then being able to talk to these companies, pitching to like the executives, pitching to the producers and stuff like that, and kind of just be a part of that team, that indie team. And then
Mhm.
like there I was started as a tech artist, but then because I was organizing everyone, I quickly became the producer of the studio. So like I had 25 developers that I was basically the producer of, and
Wow.
I was basically in charge of basically tracking all their tasks, the communication, as well as making sure everyone was on the same page across design, audio, engineering, and leadership. So it was like I was kind of doing that. um, but it was a very much indie, so like everyone's nothing was really structured and organized. It was just like what needs to be done, let's go. And then on Warhammer Online, it was more of like that was my first job as a designer, and I just basically made content. I made events. I made just MMO content, right? In that placing all the people, making sure that the spacing felt right, making sure that people had the events and go. And I specialized in just public events, which was one of the first games to have and coined the whole thing about public events. And then afterwards, like everyone copied it, and I was like, oh, nice. I was on that front line there. And then like I was at 38 Studios, for a bit and all that drama that happened with there. And there I was a content designer, but then I switched over to system design. And with the system design, I basically were taking over the tools for the whole quest system. So I controlled the quest system and the dialogue system, which are two huge tools because they like kind of go everywhere. So I would talk with the content people, I would support them. I would do a lot of other things. When I went to WildStar at NCSoft, then basically I did something similar to what I did at at 38, because like when 38 Studios like folded, all the people from Carbine, NCSoft, they basically hired like 25 of us or 30 of us or so. So like a bunch of us just like migrated together, over there to California to work on it. So it's like I keep going back from coast to coast and traveling everywhere. And then like on Star Citizen, I was a ship designer, which meant I like designed the ships a little bit. I did some level design, I did tech art again, and I did a lot of just tech design of getting the pieces and components and all that stuff set up. There's actually a lot of podcast or like our thing where it shows me showing off the different ships. So I got to like work with like people from Hollywood because the concept artists we had were from like people that did like Jupiter Ascending,
Oh
people
wow.
were working from Star Wars and some other stuff. So I got to work with a bunch of like really crazy concept artists, and they were super awesome. Um, Actually, and when I was working on 38, like R.A. Salvatore, which was a author that I had grew up reading, he was our narrative director. So I was
Wow.
able to hang out with him, talk with him, and stuff like that. And I was just like trying not to fanboy. And I'm like, his sons worked with me and stuff, so they were cool. Um, But then, like, yeah, Star Citizen, Chris Roberts, like I played his games when I was younger, like freelancer. I played Wing Commander and stuff like that. I watched some of his movies that he made, so it was kind of cool just working with them. And I was telling a friend the other day, like, because we were on Third Street Promenade in LA, like some of the cast would just walk in and just
Oh
talk to
wow.
Chris. So we would be like, some of the famous people that we had bumped into and stuff like that. And just walking around, you see like movie stars and all that stuff just walking around because we're right there where they shop and all that stuff. That's where the studio was because Chris had bought that space or like set up that space. And then like when we moved, we were right in front of Riot. So the LCS arena in LA, like we were right behind the LCS arena. So when we knew the LCS thing was going, we're like, oh man, we got to leave early today, or like we got to leave late so that we don't get traffic too much because LA is just terrible with traffic. And then yeah, then I went over to like God of War at Sony Santa Monica and stuff. And the funny thing is here is in 2005 when I moved to LA, I moved in with my buddy, and he was working at Sony Santa Monica on the other God of Wars, right? And him and his roommate and stuff were there forever. When I got hired back on when I got hired at Sony Santa Monica, the old roommate of my friend from 2005, now it's like 2017, and stuff. So like many years later and stuff, now he's the combat lead of there, and like I was the third roommate living in on their couch. And so it's really funny, like seeing him years later. Now he's married, he has kids and stuff like that, and just like, hey, what's going on? Just haven't seen each other in forever. So that was kind of cool and interesting. And then like yeah, Skull and Bones was moving over to Singapore, which I fell in love with Singapore. It was awesome. And it was a different type of studio. Like there, I was a economy, um, progression and economy lead. So I basically was managing the designers, managing the systems of making the economy and everything, right? Where like on God of War, I was just an encounter designer. I did nothing but encounters, and I messed with like combat and level flow and all that. And then I went to progression economy lead, and I was just taking care of that, managing people, managing a team of like 12 developers with another a lead engineer. And then when I left there, I went to Godfall, which Godfall I started out as a encounter designer. So again, just doing more combat stuff because they hired me for that role because of the stuff I did on God of War and because of the work I did with encounters in my other previous MMOs. Then from there, though, I ended up actually designing the last expansion pack, and basically the new game mode was what I had designed with a small team of people. So we had like 5 or 6 of us working on the game and stuff for making this new thing while the other team was working on another project. So I kind of took over leadership of that, but then I was working on the first expansion pack where I was just doing purely events and I was doing just combat and again getting the encounters and the encounter composition set up so that way people would I would reduce to lessen the amount of like fatigue of combat, which was a big problem in the first game. The base game was a lot of like just issues with combat and issues with the game feeling the same and stuff like that. So that was a big huge thing to try to fix that. And then now I'm just more of a generic game designer again. So like I'm just doing systems, I'm doing a little bit of content and doing a little bit of leading teams here and there, like small little strike teams and stuff.
Well, okay, that's a pretty
Yeah,
big like journey into the game design. But that's still like a super interesting journey, and like the fact that you worked on so many different games from so many different genres, from like single player to multiplayer to open world to like maybe more linear as well. Using like loads of different tools from loads of different companies. It's always just fascinating to hear what everyone's role was within like a certain project as well. But so you mentioned working on stuff like God of War, and then like uh, more like multiplayer games. So what is the difference in designing a single player experience from like a multiplayer experience?
So, Stars God of War was actually my first single player game I had worked on. Everything else before had been all multiplayer, had been all online, right? Like MMOs and stuff. So I had to really change my mindset of I could actually control the where the player hits things, where the player sees things and stuff like that. And that was also control I've never had before. So that was also pretty different. Then so for instance, like in God of War I worked on I don't know the actual name because I never actually played the game after at least, but I know all the dev names. So basically I know. Um
Yes.
But Fafnir's, it was like Fafnir's storage or whatever, the quest where like you have the thing and like the center thing and you put the like rock in it and then like it opens up the pathways and stuff and it opens up one at a time,
Mhm.
right? So originally all those paths are open and then as you do it, it like closes off the path. So like as you complete it, it closes it off, but then we actually changed it to where no, it opens it and stuff, right? So the reason why I'm mentioning this is because of like well, we knew exactly where the player was going to be, where you know what's going on. We knew that it's going to be one player. We knew where the camera was always going to be. We knew where it was, where the enemies going to be. So I can actually do jump scares. I could actually have things jump out at the player. Or if I work on an
Mm.
MMO, it's like, well, I might have a player here, I might have a player here, I might have a player here. So I have to be more careful with spawning. I have to have more spawn effects and all that stuff right there. And we were way less stringent when it comes to spawning and why they spawn and how ugly the spawning could look. Where like on God of War, like we were very specific in the spawning had to look good.
Mm.
Now, system design and content design, single player games are way more hacky. Like it's so much smoke and mirrors that I was like really like my heart was not ready for how much smoke and mirrors it was because like coming from an online standpoint, coming from multiplayer standpoint, like we need to systemize everything because we're going to be doing this stuff a lot. In God of War, we're like, yep, we're done with this level. We're not touching it ever again. I'm like, but are we going to make a system? Why would we make a system? It's going to take this long to do a system. We could just do this, hack it together with this. Oh, okay. So like, in God of War, the 2018 one, that is the first time that they had the concept of respawn. So I added
Mm.
respawn, but I had to fake it. I had to hack it because they wouldn't build a system for me to have respawn. So basically, on different narrative beats, if you go into a different level, as in the narrative with this narrative trigger, all it is a little token on the player that the player cannot see at all, and it just says, okay, if you have this token on you, then you will spawn XYZ encounters. But if you have this other token, then X, Y, and Z will spawn instead. So like we just had like again, we didn't have a system, so we just had to basically have it that so like everything was set up to like have 6 to 9 different more encounters than what people probably may ever see based on when they come back and when they traverse that area again.
Mm. Wow.
Where again in like MMOs and stuff like that, we build the system. We have spawners set up to where hey, this spawner will reset in 30 seconds, but then has a cooldown of 5 minutes or something like that. And then if there's enough players in this area and they're killing like farming a lot of enemies like in WoW and stuff, then we speed this up or we slow the spawners down based on the current thing. So like we always have some type of like heat maps of going on of like why and how we're spawning things. And now with machine learning, it's getting easier and easier for developers to kind of like start tapping into that data and start using data. Where like single player games, I feel like we didn't really use data that much, but we used more of emotions because it was more of a narrative game. And
Mm.
even in Godfall, we hacked so much stuff together just to push it out the door and be like, well, we don't have to worry about this, so push it out. And it was less systems. So that was kind of a big change for my brain.
There's definitely like an eye-opening experience going from one to the other, just like how things are set up in the world and stuff like that. Wow.
Yeah.
To be fair, that's pretty eye-opening for myself as well. I did not know that.
Maybe it's the studios I've been at, but that's my experience in the 2 studios that I worked on. Is like more of a single player game. But again, Godfall also had like a multiplayer aspect of it, but it was still very much closer to like God of War than it was any of the other games I worked on.
Yeah, I could definitely see like the similarities between the two, but having two different genres at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are pretty much like most of the questions that I had ready for you today, Randy. But before we head off, I've got one last question for you, mainly towards like up and coming game designers. So I'd be curious, what advice would you give to aspiring game designers from like all the experience that you've had before?
Run now. Kidding.
Oh.
No, I'm just kidding. So the best advice I can give, and if I can only give one advice, is play more board games and design more board games or tabletop, something like that. Like, if you're an aspiring designer, right, and you only want to focus on doing digital stuff, then you're going to be stuck in a digital mindset where if you actually start building a tabletop, you start building this pure design, you can prototype it right now with no help, no tech, no code, nothing. You know, you can prototype it out, you can get people to play test it, you can get feedback, you can do all the loops of game design right now without having to worry about tech, without having to worry about art, without having to worry about stuff. You can do it right now. And that to me is like for aspiring game designers is push on just making the board game, making the prototype, make it in real life, and you'd be surprised how you'll use that throughout your career.
Do you think that is like pretty solid advice? And even talking to like game designer Chloe from last week, she was even saying like board games are such a good way to like visualize game design in such a quick way rather than like opening up the tools and like rendering stuff. It's just like, all right, pen to paper, does this work?
Oh
And
yeah.
it's a yeah, I feel like it's a super valuable thing to
Yep.
for aspiring game designers to
Yeah.
use.
On quick story, sorry. On Skull and Bones, the old senior designer before me that I replaced, he actually did a really cool prototype of the economy, and he basically had like little meeples and stuff like that. He had little ships and stuff, and he just gathered pieces from various board games, and he made the entire loop of the game
Wow.
on the board game and stuff like that. So that way he didn't have to worry about tech or anything, and he can just get the directors and get people to play the game and be like, hey, this is the core loop. This is how we want the players to play. This is what we want people thinking. So it's not the same, but it's a close approximation enough that we could actually go through test the mechanics, test the flow, test the logic, and that is the important thing of testing behind design. And so that's it.
No, to be fair, they're like super valuable points, and like even using your example as well from Scarlet Bones, it just shows that whether you haven't yet been into the industry or whether you're like an industry veteran, just putting pen to paper is a great way to just like showcase your ideas. Be like, these are the ideas I had. What do you think?
Definitely 100% like where pen to paper is the important thing because like I said earlier, ideas are worth nothing, but then once you start implementing ideas, then that's when it becomes thing tangible to like intangible to tangible. That is when you can
Mm-hmm.
actually start getting things going.
Nice. Well, yeah, that's pretty much all the questions I had for you today. And like that concludes another episode of the Game Deadlock podcast. But if anyone has any additional questions, where could people find you across the World Wide Web?
Um, Probably LinkedIn would probably be the best bet. So just find me on LinkedIn. I think there's a few of me though, so just look for my crazy picture.
Okay. Nice. And yeah, I've been your host, Nichola, today, and you can find me at Humphreys Media on pretty much most social media platforms. I'm usually quite active. And yeah, if you want to continue this discussion as well within the Game Dev London community, feel free to visit the Discord on gamedev.london/join. And yeah, thanks for following, like, and subscribe for more. And be sure to visit the Game Dev London website. And yeah, thanks again, Randy, for being a wonderful guest today.
Cheers. Have a good night.
Okay, bye.
Bye.